Шановні колеги,
Esteemed colleagues, let's start our briefing of the Ukrainian Media Center for Reforms. Today we are going to speak about a loan restructurization of currency credits, currency loans, and I would like to introduce you to our speakers representing the National Bank of Ukraine, and soon the representative of the National Council will join us. Esteemed speakers, you're welcome. Esteemed colleagues, I'm going to introduce you to the issues related to the events in Ukraine related to reforms. Yesterday I've mentioned that in Verkhovna Rada there will be a constructive dialogue on approval on a range of law drafts, including the fund of deposits guarantee. The range of laws was approved, and unfortunately there was also a draft law which is quite controversial as regards of conversion of loans. And to be frank, besides the discussion, the populism of this very event, this law is quite important as regards of the course of reforms, because Ukraine, as far as you know, and it pertains to every of us, is undergoing the clearance period and period of regaining trust to the banking system. And such controversial laws, they negatively influence the mood of the society, but with due account of the fact that this law was not yet approved, I believe that we once more have to assess the meaning of this law for reform in the banking sphere. And I'll remind you, reform in banking sphere means not just new regulations, new laws, but the status of banking sphere. That is why we are glad that we have representatives of the National Bank of Ukraine, as well as Association of Independent Banks of Ukraine, which may clarify the meaning of this decision for the banking system. That is why I give you the floor. Mr. Novikov, you're welcome. How much time do we have? Only 3-4 minutes. Hello. For us as well, the result of yesterday's session was unexpected because we expected adoption of the draft law 2045A as regards of amendments to the law on loans granting related to investments of international institutions, in particular the World Bank. But this very draft law was not discussed. But in the third reading, there was a draft law 15. Let me see, 1558/1, and it was adopted. 91 votes were for this draft law. I would like to mention that the National Bank has published the press release as regards of the economy of this issue, that this very draft law will bring losses to the banking system, maybe to 95 billion hryvnias. Nevertheless, I would like to mention we are not speaking just about losses. So these are the losses for the Ukraine in general, for the economy of Ukraine, because the mentioned draft law, if it will be implemented by the banking system, will bring great losses to the system itself, existing in place and constituting the vascular system of Ukraine's economy. It may lead to the situation when some banks will have to restore to reduction in social payments from the budget, because they will be obliged to follow the guaranteed payments to the citizens of Ukraine. But it does not mean that compensation will be granted only due to budgetary funds, but there are other approaches when the bank loses its ability to pay, and we speak about those people having deposits over 200,000 hryvnias. We speak about legal persons about budgetary organizations, about state enterprises. They also lose funds which are taken out of the market, and it may lead to bankruptcy and loss of jobs. So the figures of losses may be higher than if just to speak about losses for the banking system, which needs decapitalization of banks, because under today's conditions, it is difficult, even according to those stress tests carried out for the banking system, it is difficult to have this additional burden, because this very law may be enacted and it will inflict more harm to the banking system and to the economy of Ukraine in general. And I would like to mention, quite often the National Bank was accused of doing nothing. It had carried out, facilitated no measures. I would like to mention, I did it at working groups as regards of developing this draft laws. I would like to tell you that the National Bank, along with the associations, with experts from the international banking sphere, were participants to development of Knyazevich draft law, who during the previous year was ready to address the issue of loans for socially protected citizens of Ukraine, because the draft law, which was passed yesterday, is directed at any consumer, any user of banking services, irrespective of his financial status. But the Knyazevich draft law was directed at protection of socially vulnerable people, and it was not supported by the Verkhovna Rada back then, and it was, so to say, rejected. That is why now we have this populism taking place. We saw yesterday in Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. Mr. Victor, several specifying questions. For us, to understand the policy of the National Bank, yesterday's draft law on granting deposits, when we speak about individuals, banks, clients, in order to make the economy healthier, it is more important to have this program of granting the compensation of deposits and making that very banking system more healthy, which is now in place. So this is the main priority. That would be the first. And secondly, now we are coming to the period of some slight compromises, some sophisticated compromises. And if such compromise according to loans is possible, tell us, when is it possible, if to speak about interests of national banks, international institutions, when we speak about socially unprotected citizens of Ukraine? And the main problem which took place is that the situation when there may not be a simple solution of the problem. It is not, well, sometimes it is possible to solve in a simple way quite a difficult problem. And now I ask Olena to tell us about the position of private banks.
Good afternoon. Thank you. The banking system believes that passing the law 1558-1 is subversion not just against Ukraine but against all Ukrainian people. Because if we started from the draft law that was just on social housing, now that is refers to all borrowers who were borrowing in currency exchange. Why do we do that? We understand that the hryvnia depositors and foreign exchange depositors, 240 people, will be deprived of, for them we will resolve the problems at the expense of several million depositors. Knyaziewicz's law satisfied both the banking system and the borrowers in foreign currency. There was also the alternative draft of which also satisfied banking system I can say that the losses from converting all the deposits at the exchange rate 5.5 will be 100 billion, which will be direct losses, immediate losses of the banks. Besides, every year the banks will be losing 2 billion hryvnias because of the non-market cost of the resource. The consequences of the law, our exchange rate will be the 40 or 50. If all the banks go to the interbank to purchase $40 billion, then this will mean a very sharp increase of exchange rate, and that would affect every citizen of Ukraine, because then again the salaries will be depreciated, the cost of all products will go up, the cost of gasoline, and who will feel worse, we do not know. But I believe that the populism should be encouraged. I believe that in October there will be elections and everyone's working for the future election campaign, but my dear Ukrainians, not by such ways we need to do that, especially because passing of that law is direct violation of agreement with the IMF, which on the 28th of February we signed. And that restructuring should be voluntary and there should be no draft laws. And the issue of social justice, why the borrowers who were taking loans in hryvnia at a higher interest rate, understanding the risks, have to be in worse conditions than those who were taking loans in foreign currency. Also, we analyzed the situation, talking about the socially deprived population, the exchange, and 70,000 people are those who got loans in foreign currency, and the banks are ready to resolve the problem, provide social housing for the 40% who are impoverished. And the question is still outstanding. What should those people do who basically pay all the pay off their credits, pay interest? No one was running and requesting people to take loans in foreign currency. Every person should be responsible. We need to have a socially responsible society. It is very good to write off foreign currency loan at the exchange rate 5.5. I also had a loan and I paid it off. Many who are in Maidan, they have several apartments. They were offered to buy, sell one apartment and pay off your loan. No, they say we want the loan to be written off at the exchange rate 5.5. Also, the position of the banks is that the banks are ready for negotiations. That is the general policy. That's the general policy. In each bank, there are several programs of restructuring. There's the memorandum which several banks joined. And talking about other banks, there's an issue with foreign capital. But the banks, they are trying to do it. A lot has been done. The law on tax privileges was approved.
Налога, а банки разрешено.
The banks can refer that to expenditures. Besides, in the banks, starting from 2008, when they prohibited foreign currency loans, they do restructuring. In many banks, there's a line for restructuring. The main thing is desire. The main thing is to go to the bank to request, to say, I can pay that much. Let us together think how to make my loan such that could be serviced. Olena Karabkova represents all commercial banks of Ukraine. We represent 90% of assets of all banking systems. That includes not only Ukrainian banks, state banks as well, and banks with foreign capital, because the burden on the state budget will be very huge. New banks will be in the fund of guarantee, and the state banks will need additional capitalization. Now Andriy Dubas, the representative of the National Bank of Ukraine. He will give us additional information. Good afternoon. I would like to draw your attention, first of all, to the fact that this is we do have this problem with foreign currency loans, and the problem is to be addressed. And in the National Bank, they believe that the problem should be resolved via voluntary approach agreement between the bank and the borrower. Talking about standard terms, the banks offered such standard terms in the form of memorandum, and there are already requests from physical persons, borrowers, with requests to restructure such loan. The most important component of the memorandum is the issue of social aspect of this memorandum. Many people get the possibility to receive privileges for their loans, and that is the key part of the discussion. When they're talking about this law, this doesn't have that component. There are different currency loans in the law 1558. It's either for purchasing expensive goods or for transportation. Anyone can enjoy that preference. On the other hand, there is a memorandum, there is a social housing, and for such people we offer simplification, like 50% of the cost of the loan. The banks propose the preferences, the privileges that they can agree for this small category of people. That is probably the key thing, because we preserve the principle of voluntarity, which says that the state and the National Bank will not interfere into the process between the borrower and the bank in issue of exchange foreign currency loans. Talking about the banks which joined this memorandum, we need also to mention the banks that suggest different programs of restructuring. The National Bank has several times had meetings with the representatives of banks and with the representatives of borrowers, and they are developing the mechanism of a single approach, and such approach is the memorandum. Oksana Mytnitska, UCMC. There's a problem. There is a voluntary approach, but there are attempts in political or any other sense to use it. This is probably the question to both Mr. Novikov and to Olena. Do you believe it feasible? Will you be lobbying the return of that draft law of Knyazevich or some other variations? And do you believe that besides this mechanism which is existing, this problem needs to be resolved at the legislative level? Thank you for your question. And from the position of the National Bank, the National Bank does not support a mandatory conversion we need to preserve the principle of voluntarity, and that is the principle which is in the memorandum. The bankers came up with this initiative on a voluntary basis. So we have Mr. Dubas Novikov from the National Bank and Olena Koropkova from the National Independent Association of the Banks. They presented the position, and from Ukrainian Media Center of Reforms, we would like to mention, when we are talking about reforms, the execution of reforms or certain regulations should not be just happening via laws or the resolutions of the Cabinet of Ministers. There are many instruments when those or these or those different issues are regulated via individual agreements. And we now have the situation when there are big efforts made by the National Bank of Ukraine, by the association, to find individual solution without any legislative interference. Legislative interference is not the only instrument of implementing reforms. The main thing is to address the problem, to resolve the problem, and we need to pay attention to daily actions in banking system in order to restore the trust to banking system on the one hand, on the other hand to take into account the interests of all the consumers, both the depositors and the debtors. And so this is it for today. I would like to thank you, and I would like to draw attention that any resolution, any solution, even populist, could be assessed from the point of view of implementing reforms in Ukraine. Very often the difficult process of reforms could be violated by one very not very successful voting. Thank you.